This is a special Vanguard Court Watch Council meeting. Every month on the fourth Sunday of the month, we rotate around the county and have a public meeting. Next month we'll be meeting in Davis and then Woodland. This month we're meeting here in West Sacramento. And we have a special program for you today. Up here are 4 panelists, and there will be a 5th who is en route. And we're going to be speaking about police-community relations today. Now I want to tell you that we invited the police chief to be here tonight, and he didn't even respond to turn down our request for his presence. We also invited Councilmember Roger Dickinson, who did agree to be here and then was told by his city attorney that because there's pending litigation against the city that he couldn't attend. So enough about who's not here. I'm going to quickly introduce everybody who is here, and then we will start our show. So on the far left is Moenig, who's representing an individual who was shot by West Sacramento police. On my immediate left is the former California Supreme Court Justice Cruz Reynoso. On my right is Civil Rights Attorney Jim Chanin, and on the far right is Assemblymember, soon-to-be Senator Roger Dickinson. Assemblymember Dickinson unfortunately has another engagement to attend this evening, so we've agreed to allow him to speak first. So go ahead.
Sure, thanks. Well, thank you, and thanks for the invitation to join you this evening, and thank you all for being here. I think that my message tonight is, I think, a fairly simple one. And for some of you who may not be familiar with me, I served for nearly 17 years as a Sacramento County Supervisor before going to the Assembly. So I have some first-hand experience serving on the governing board that deals with the law and with law enforcement agencies, including the Sacramento County Sheriff's Department and, of course, the Sacramento County District Attorney's Office. And because as a county supervisor, as well as a member of the Assembly, I represent a lot of the city of Sacramento, as well as the entirety of the city of West Sacramento. I also have had the opportunity in that capacity to work with and be involved with the city of Sacramento Police Department, as well as the West Sac Police Department from time to time. So I have some background in dealing with issues that often become quite difficult, both for members of governing boards as well as for the community at large when it comes to relationships with law enforcement community. What I have deduced over the years it comes down to a pretty simple equation, and that is that a community works best and law enforcement works best when there is a relationship of trust and confidence between the two. And that trust and confidence can only be successfully built and maintained when there is an openness and a transparency on the part of the law enforcement agencies that allows the community the information and the facts, the knowledge to believe that they can make informed judgments and that they have a full rendition of what has occurred. So when that is present, then I think there are strong relationships between law enforcement and the community that you will see that exist, where there is an effort by law enforcement to reach out and engage and involve members of the community in the work they do, to in fact in some cases make sure that they are part and parcel of that work, because really in the end I think anyone in law enforcement will tell you that they can't make a community safe without the involvement, the active engagement of the citizenry. When that occurs, then in my experience there's generally a very good relationship between law enforcement and members of the community. But where that's lacking, then it becomes a much more difficult proposition. And where law enforcement, whether it's through officers on the street or whether it's through prosecutors, begin to take actions that do not have community support because they haven't been fully discussed, they haven't been fully thought through, they haven't been shared and worked out, then you find much more friction and much more disaffection between the law enforcement community and the broader community. This is always something that, as citizens, we need to make sure that we engage our law enforcement officials in a discussion of when those occasions arise, as they do, as they have here in West Sacramento, but have elsewhere as well. When these occasions arise, then it is important to bring them into the light and call on our government officials, broadly as well as our law enforcement officials, to engage in that more open discussion. So whether it's in Santa Rosa or Los Angeles or in Lodi or here in West Sacramento or anywhere else, what's particularly significant from my point of view as someone who wants to make sure that we are all living, not just living with the perception, but actually living in a safe community, that we feel that law enforcement works with us and for us. As one who believes that that's an important goal, then it is also important for us to look for that open dialogue and that open connection between the broader community and law enforcement officials. Now, that doesn't mean it's always an easy task or an easy discussion or an easy matter. These are tough, difficult issues. In the case of Sacramento County, we had a lot of tough issues to deal with, for example, with conduct in the county jail at one point in time. And they weren't easy problems to tackle. There is a natural inclination on the part of those who've engaged in certain types of conduct to be defensive about that conduct. That's a natural human reaction. So it means that we have to be persistent. We have to continue to ask the questions. We have to continue to insist on a more open and transparent exchange. And we have to expect our law enforcement officials to live up to the oath that they take and to be the very best they can be in order to protect us and make our communities safe. So sometimes these issues are going to be worked out in the public domain of discussion. Sometimes they're going to get worked out in a courtroom. But wherever the forum is for resolving them, it's something that all of us as citizens have to be involved in. We cannot be apathetic. We cannot be passive. We cannot just let someone else worry about it, because then that will lead to a result ultimately that it will not work for the entire community. So that's why, let me just end where I began. I'm so pleased that you're here tonight, that you care about these issues, that you have the expectation of the highest standard and level of public protection from law enforcement here and throughout our region. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Assemblymember, and we understand if you cut out on us. So the rest of this panel discussion will take place between now and about 6 o'clock, give or take. And then after that point in time, we're going to have the public come up if they have questions, if they want to share their story, really whatever you want to say. Try to be mindful that we're only here until 7, and so try to limit your comments, even though I know that these are very passionate issues for a lot of you. Try to limit your comments in the interest of time. So our first two speakers, and Tony Palik should be here any moment now, have had actual cases in Yolo County and actually in West Sacramento that they've had to deal with. The first is Chris Moenig, who's going to talk about the case that he's working on and some of his observations.
Hi, I'm Chris. I'm not sure if many of you have probably seen David's article on Mr. Dewey, who was recently sued the West Sacramento Police Department. It all started on a night, July 9th, 2012, so about a year and a half ago. It was in the Ironworks community, West Sacramento, and Kevin, I'm going to call him Kevin, he's a good friend of mine actually, and his wife Jessica were having a disagreement. And there was a knock at the door, and Kevin answers the door, and there's the Ironworks security guard. And he said, hey, just want to let you know your garage door in the back alley is open. It's kind of a security thing in case something gets taken or whatever. I want to let you know. He goes, I think I'm good, thanks. Closes the door. The security guard goes around the house. I'm not sure if you know the layout of the Ironworks community, but they're kind of a very close situated homes. And he goes around to the alleyway. And as he goes around, a police car pulls up. And two officers get out. And the dash cam's on. So there's actually a video. And that video is going to be made available to David here shortly. And the two officers get out, and they see the security guard, and the security guard goes, hey, what are you here for? I just talked to the occupants. And one of the police officers shines flashlight into the garage, and they say, oh, we're here for a different matter, don't worry. They don't inquire as to how the conversation went with the occupant or not. And the other officer goes around outside the alleyway to the front of the home, and you can't really see what's going on because the dash cam doesn't follow him. And the other officer's in the back, and he's just waiting, and then a couple seconds pass, and all of a sudden you see the officer get a call from his mic, and he starts rushing around the corner. And that officer that is the one that stayed behind, his audio is activated. The other officer's audio is not activated. So as he clears the corner, you can hear kicking, and you hear, police, open the door, let me see your, and he says this cuss word, right, let me see your bang right now. And we presume that he says hands when the gun goes off. So he doesn't even finish the sentence after he says open the door, and the gun is immediately fired. And then on the audio, he immediately says to the other officer, I got one shot off, and he came at me, he reached for my gun, and he's in a panic, and he's screaming, get down, get down. And the police immediately they all rush to the scene or whatever, because there's a shot fired. And Mr. Dewey's cuffed and taken to the hospital. And the next day, I actually visited him. Well, that night I got a call from his wife. I showed up. I saw the scene. I showed up to the hospital the next day. They wouldn't let me see Kevin. I said I'm his attorney. They still didn't want me to see Kevin. I said, are you denying Kevin his rights to see an attorney? They made some phone calls, whatever. They were very upset about it. They eventually let me see him. Going forward, they released to the media that Kevin had reached for the officer's gun and had attacked him, and that's why he was shot. And what I believe really happened was that he had his gun out of his holster, he was kicking the door, and the door flung open, and he lost his balance for a half second or whatever, and it caused the gun to go off. That's what I really believe happened. And then he made a very bad mistake, but I believe, in judgment, where he probably thought, oh my God, I'm going to lose my job here. I just shot somebody. What do I say? He's probably a bad guy. I'll just blame it on him. They'll probably believe me. They'll probably back me up. I'll be okay. And so he lied about it. It's been a long year and a half. After about 6 months, we filed a Public Records Act request, asking for just the results. It came to our attention that he went back to duty shortly thereafter, maybe a couple days of administrative leave after the shooting. And 6 months later, I think it was around December 2012, we did a Public Records Act request, and we said we just want to know the results of the internal investigation. We obviously did one. We said to the media the next day after the shooting that you're going to do a standard administrative investigation. So we want to know the results. Was it justified, unjustified? We just want to know what your department says. And the response was, you can have that information, give us some time to collect it, and we'll get back to you. A few more days went by, and then I got another response that said, we changed our mind. We think those are confidential documents, part of the police officer's personnel file. And this personnel file of the police officers is, if you don't know, it's very closely guarded. Only very small bits of information can come out of it, and it's for the protection of the officer. So we actually filed a lawsuit. We filed a writ of mandate requesting that the West Sacramento Police Department disclose the results of the investigation. I didn't want what was in the police officer's personnel file. I didn't want details. I just wanted the very specific information, whether it was justified, unjustified, or still pending. And we filed suit, I think it was in April 2013. So at this point in time, the shooting occurred in July. So we're a good 9 or 10 months after the shooting. And the response is, well, the investigation is still pending. That's why they didn't give it to you. It's still pending. And I said, wait a minute. You have a 9-month investigation here, internal affairs, happened one day back in July. Meanwhile, this officer gave a statement that he was attacked, and you press charges against Mr. Huey for attacking an officer within one day, but it takes you 9 months and you still can't figure out if it's excessive force or not? I said, well, that's great. We want to go forward with the lawsuit because I can't wait for you to explain that in front of a judge. And the response was, okay, fine, we'll give you a letter. Here's a letter, and we're going to say excessive force. And I wasn't sure what that exactly meant. Did that mean that, we looked at the situation and, he was unarmed and he was in his home and it probably shouldn't have rose to the level of somebody getting shot? Or was there actual excessive force and it was completely wrongful conduct and he lied about it? So I pressed back even further and I said, that's great that you gave this letter about excessive force, we really appreciate that, but what about the fabricating evidence and lying after the fact? And the response was, well, we thought that the excessive force portion of the investigation was the appropriate focus. That's interesting because excessive force would have been helpful in the beginning had you done it 9 months earlier. However, this man, my friend Kevin, his life has been a living hell because he's had criminal felony charges against him for attacking an officer for the last 9, 10 months. And that could have all gone away if you'd done your investigation in regards to that portion of the claim. So I pressed back again. I said, no, that is not the appropriate focus. You need to do that.
You have to get to the end of the story.
Yeah, sure, I'll speed it up. And I'm nearing the end.
Okay.
I'm a little bit passionate about this.
It's a good story.
So I pressed some more. They said, well, that's fine. We're not going to do it. We're going to refer it to the district attorney's office. And it's my understanding that the district attorney here in Yolo County doesn't really come too hard on down on the officers because they work day in and day out with the officers. And I think one exception would be Officer Alvarez, where they're prosecuting him criminally. But the district attorney's office dragged their feet for 5 or 6 months, couldn't conclude the investigation either. So a year and a half went by, and they finally concluded, or released the results to us after we filed suit, that they decided not to criminally prosecute the officer for fabricating evidence or for excessive force or for anything. And that was November 2013, after a shooting in July 2012. And we filed suit in January. And there's some other incidents, and I'd love to talk to you all night about it, but I've already been told that I'm past my time.
People may have questions, so.
Sure. Okay.
So Tony, we're going to throw it right on the Ladies and gentlemen, Tony Palik had to travel here from San Francisco.
Yes, and one train ran late, and then I missed another train, but I got here.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you.
So he is going to talk about one of the more notorious cases that he was involved in several different stages. The Galvan brothers, who in 2005?
Yeah, that's when the incident occurred, but then the last trial was in 2010. Thank you.
Yes. All right. You ready?
You remember better than I do.
I sat through 2 trials.
That's right, or 3, or 2. Okay. Am I supposed to speak now?
Yeah.
Okay. One thing I'd like to say, I don't know how many of you know about the Galvan trial that occurred in... How about a show of hands? How many people here heard about the Galvan trial? Okay, then I'm going to have to tell you about it. The Galvan trial involved... should I stand or should I stay seated?
Stand, I think.
Oh, okay. All right. The Galvan trial was a criminal trial.
People were requesting the money.
Oh, okay, great. The Galvan trial was a criminal trial where the only charges that were brought against the defendants were resisting arrest and assault on an officer. Now, having practiced criminal defense for 17 years, or almost 17 years, whenever I see those as the only charges, I automatically become suspicious, because if there was a crime that they were investigating where there was probable cause to believe a crime was committed, then you'd think that the charge might have to do with something other than simply the procedure in which the police engaged at the time of the alleged incident. And the Galvan trial was interesting because we had 3 trials. If you look it up on the web, you can see some newspaper articles about it. If you put in Galvan and West Sacramento, it'll probably come right up. But the first trial ended with a hung jury, but only 1 juror refused to convict. The second trial was pretty much the same result. However, in the third trial, everything switched. And in the third trial, one of the charges against, or actually it was the only charge against one of the brothers, which was resisting arrest, was he was exonerated of that. So he was completely acquitted, as they say, or found not guilty. And the other brother, Ernesto, he had suffered a tremendous, terrible head injury as a consequence of a beating he received from the officers at the time of the arrest. The jury found 7 to 5 in favor of acquitting him. Now, the reason I think that we got that result at the end on the third trial, there are a couple of reasons. One is, every prosecutor knows that the more times you retry a case, the harder it's going to get. Because there are reasons that the jury didn't want to convict the first time, and the lawyers are going to be even better and better and better at pointing these reasons out. Well, in the third trial, I finally got my chance to be the lead attorney. I was a co-counsel in the first trial and didn't have much participation, unfortunately. But in the third trial, I got to be the lead attorney for Mr. Ernesto Galvan, and I worked with a public defender who's very talented, Martha Sequeira. Some of you may know her. She's a very, very talented attorney with the Public Defender's Office. And we were able, I think, to show the jury that the stories that were being told by the officers in the report simply just didn't fit the evidence in terms of the science. And that's what juries want to see, right? They want to see the science, because that's how you prove and disprove things. Most importantly, in the Galvan case, was the fact that the officers claimed that they had to beat him with their batons because he was so incredibly strong that he'd been using methamphetamine, and then somehow he was like the Incredible Hulk, and they were terrified of him. And there were 3 officers, by the way, so it was pretty, and the other brother, Fermin, he'd been knocked unconscious right at the beginning of this incident by one of the officers who claimed he was advancing toward the scene of the beating and asking them to stop. And the third officer hit him in the face with a baton and knocked him unconscious. Now that officer claimed it was a leg sweep, but there was a big baton mark across his face, and then another long bruise across his back that was exactly the shape of a baton, so it it was easy to say that he was hit in the face and then hit on the back as he fell. And of course this is all controversial, and it's up to anyone's own idea as to what happened based on what's presented, but I think that was the evidence, and that's why the jury had problems with this. In the case of Ernesto, and I'm getting back, sorry to digress a little there, but getting back to what was really important in terms of showing that there was a problem with the evidence was the fact that they claimed, as they beat him, that any blows to his head, and he had received several because he had at least 7 or 8 skull fractures, that any blows to his head were a consequence of the blows being deflected off of his arms. Now the batons they're using are steel. They're steel batons. These aren't aluminum. You know, I mean, these are harder than oak. I mean, if they were using oak batons, these are harder, stiffer. And on the end is a little tip, which is designed to deliver a very strong, or very concentrated amount of pressure on one point, which results in a very, very severe injury. So when we cross-examined the doctor for the prosecution, it was clear that, and actually our doctor, both doctors really agreed that if you're deflecting these blows with your arms, then you should have significant arm injuries, probably multiple broken bones in your arms. Well, the only bone that was broken in Ernesto's arm was on one wrist, and there was this little bump here, which is called the styloid process. It's a little bump on your wrist, you know, on the outside. And that was consistent, according to our expert, with being hammered. Now, we don't know for sure that that's what happened, but it would be the only explanation that would make sense, because the only people who witnessed anything, really, were the 3 officers. We depend on the police to be honest with us because they're protecting us. We depend on them, and we want them to be our eyes and ears, and to be true to us, and to be loyal to us, and to serve us. But when officers engage in excessive force and then lie about this is worse, I think, than a criminal committing a battery, because it's a betrayal of a sacred trust. Now, now that I've talked about the Galvan case, I want to just say something real quick about the police department and what I think could improve. I don't know, maybe things have. I haven't been here in a year or so, and I have a lot of cases. Most of my cases have been in the Old County, but I haven't had it in about a year. In the case of the Galvan case, the expert that was used as their expert was also somebody involved in their training, in the training of the officers. And ironically, he was the trainer for the BART police at the time that a lot of things have happened over with BART. You've probably heard about those issues. And so that doesn't bode well for Mr. Cameron, who was the expert. And one thing I noticed at the trial was that this expert that they brought, Don Cameron, seemed not to believe there was any such thing as excessive force. When I cross-examined him, he indicated that it didn't matter if the person was without any weapons. You know, in this case, he alleged that his feet were bare. I don't think they were, but that's what they alleged, because they had to explain later why his boots were on the pavement. I think they were removed by the EMT at the time, but in any event, they had to explain away a lot of inconsistencies. And one of these things was, you know, how come you're using batons, which are really defensive weapons, in an offensive manner? And Mr. Cameron was saying, well, you know, if you fear for your life, you can do anything you want. You know, if the guy's got bare hands and bare feet, he's on his knees. He even said, I asked him, I said, well, what if he's on his knees and he's unarmed? Yeah, you can do it. What if he's on his back? Oh, sure. If you're afraid for your life, you can do it. Now, a lot of us understand the sort of danger that police officers, I mean, we have at least an intellectual understanding of it, maybe not a personal experience with it, and I don't really either, but we understand that these are people who are sent out into harm's way to protect us. So they do have to have certain skills that are lethal under some circumstances, where they have to protect themselves from their own death or their own serious bodily injury. But that doesn't mean that they're absolved of all responsibility for how they conduct themselves in those regards. And if you're not teaching officers what excessive force means, how can you expect them to know how to appropriately handle a person that is allegedly dangerous? Another thing I want to mention real quick before I'm done, I don't know how much time I've got.
You're right on the edge.
Okay. there are a lot of times that police officers have to deal with people who are mentally ill, and I've seen several cases in my career where they really just, immediately pulled a gun and shot, even when the person had a weapon, which makes sense, but where the person was insane to start with, and maybe if they just, let them be there for a while and bring in more assistance or do whatever is necessary to prevent a lethal act by either party, that maybe the situation could be brought under control. I mean, they have as much time as they need under those circumstances. And I'll give you an example. I represented a family of a fellow who was shot by police who had a knife, and he was psychotic. And of course, it was scary and he was threatening. But it was clear to me, at least, from the deposition of the officers, that they could have done a lot of things instead of simply pull out a gun and shoot him. And on the other side of this sort of situation, there's a fellow named Frank Chu in San Francisco. He is an example of what could happen if police got the proper training and used the proper methods. He's also psychotic. And there's a movie, it's a documentary, you can watch it online if you look for 12 Galaxies, Lunch with Frank Chu and the 12 Galaxies. Part of his delusion is that the 12 galaxies are persecuting him and that he has to protest against their persecution. So he walks around San Francisco with a placard that says, nonsense on it. And everyone loves him for it. He's an icon of the city. And if you go downtown to like Montgomery and the market, you'll see him with this placard, and people walk up to him and pat him on the back. And he's beloved. He's a lovely man, actually. I've met him. He's a very gentle, kind man. He doesn't make a lot of sense, but he means well, right? Well, in the 80s, he was involved in his arrest under the same circumstances as that case I told you about with the guy with the knife. In this case, however, the police did what they needed to do. They understood that he was psychotic. They brought in assistance of whatever kind they needed, and he was eventually rehabilitated, and now he's a lovely person. Okay, so people sometimes die needlessly. Yes, they look dangerous at the time, but they're suffering from a mental illness. That doesn't mean that we should just ignore that fact, the fact of the mental illness, and shoot them. So I think these are all examples of where we as citizens need to...
Now I do need to...
Yeah, we as citizens, I was just finishing. We as citizens need to step up and say to our police department, you guys, we want you to do what's right. We want you to get better training in the use of force, and we also want you to be honest with us when excessive force is used, even if it's accidental. Thank you.
Thank you. We actually covered the Galvan case. It was one of the first trials. Kathy, who's sitting in the third row, it was one of our first big trials that we covered. And one of the interesting things after the second trial was there was a column in the San Francisco Weekly, which is kind of like the SAC News and Review, and they made the comment that Don Cameron has never seen an excessive force case that he hasn't approved of. It was really something. Now I'm going to introduce the former Supreme Court Justice Cruz Reynoso. Cruz Reynoso has been involved in actually several different recent police incidents. He headed the task force that looked into the pepper spray at UC Davis. He also headed another task force that looked into the shooting in Woodland of Luis Gutierrez, who was shot by a sheriff's deputy. So, Cruz?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I want to first express a caution. And the caution is this, that the police and the prosecutors have great PR. Most people do not believe that an officer is capable of lying. And so those of us who have seen, who understand what's going on, and who are at a meeting like this, start feeling that surely others must agree with us. But I just want to express to you my own feeling that unless these stories get into the public press, and unless they read about these things, unless every citizen reads about these things, we will continue to live with that reality. And I tell you that because the Luis Gutierrez case went to trial, a civil trial, and the jury did not find that the police had done anything wrong. That happens to be, in my view, completely incorrect. But I believe, and the gentleman who sat through all the trial said that all of the jurors, who's in a federal court, came from small towns in Northern California. And I believe that none of them had ever had any problems with the police. And most citizens have not had the sort of problems with the police that we hear about here. And so I just add that cautionary note because I've told the commission that I had in terms of Ms. Gutierrez that our role will really be to help educate the public, particularly the public of this county and Woodland. So just that caution. Now, beyond that, I should tell you that when I was working with as the chair of the committee looking at the pepper spray in UC Davis, I had a lot of contact with many experts. One expert was the type that gets hired by police departments to go and do a complete review and make recommendations to them. So he's not anti-police at all. He gets hired by them. He had been hired, as I say, between 50 and 60 police departments. He told me that of those, only one met the standard that he thought all police departments should meet. And the standard that all of them failed except one was that they would enforce the law equally against their own fellow officers as they would against those who are not their fellow officers. Said differently, that they would lie for their fellow officers, from his point of view, is not at all unusual. In fact, it's expected. But again, let me repeat, only one met that standard. And I think we have a duty, and the standard is set up high. What does the DA do? What does the chief of police do? Do the officers understand that if they don't tell on somebody else violating the law, they'll get fired or get disciplined? And unfortunately, we do not have that, and it's very difficult. Because if a police officer is truthful and tells a fellow police officer, other police officer will turn on him, and he will be afraid that if he's in danger sometime, they will not protect him. So it's not an easy situation, but it's something that until we change that, sad to say, cases like this will come up over and over again. Secondly, what the DA does is very important, and I just want to read to you what the American Bar Association says as a guideline for prosecuting officers. An office of prosecutor is charged with responsibility for prosecution in its jurisdiction. The prosecutor is an administrator of justice, an advocate, and an officer of the court. The prosecutor must exercise some discretion in the performance of his or her functions. The duty of a prosecutor is to seek justice, not merely to convict. Sad to say, I don't see that in Yolo County. Little attention is paid to justice, and much is paid to prosecution and to see how long they can put a person in prison. So very often, a person will be sent to prison for many, many years, costing the people of this state millions and millions of dollars, whereas the person, if they should have gone to jail at all, should have been for a short time. And until we change how a prosecutor uses his or her discretion, things will not change. We do have some possibilities, and that is that in the last many years, we have taken much of the discretion away from the judges and given it to the prosecutor. I trust that we're beginning to have second thoughts about that, we as the people of California, and I trust that we will return some of that discretion to the judges instead of leaving it all to the prosecutor. I'm sorry that my message to you is not an easy one. It means a lot of work on all of us for a long time to change the ambiance and to change the police departments, particularly the police chief, and to change the DAs, particularly the elected DA, and then we will come a bit closer to real justice in Yolo County.
Yeah.
Thank you, Cruz. And lastly, Jim Chanin.
rights attorney for 36 years, and I've done over 25 cases where my client was killed by different law enforcement agencies, prisons, etc. So I'm going to talk about one of them, which happened right here in West Sacramento, an incident that occurred on November 27, 1990. But then I'm going to go on to talk about what the legislature is doing now about police privacy, because California is the most restrictive state in the entire United States about the public records and disclosure of people's personnel files. And our legislature, who can change this in one vote, is culpable in this matter. Not the police unions who are doing their job, advocating for their officers. We may not agree with it, but that's what they do. But what the legislators are supposed to do is they're supposed to pass laws where we can find out what the people we're paying taxes for are doing, like what discipline they have, who they've shot and killed, what complaints there are against them. Now that used to be something we could find out here in California until the California Supreme Court did the Copley decision, and then all the police review commissions that were existing, including the one I was on in Berkeley, where I lived before I lived in Oakland, had to go private. The public meetings ceased to exist. So you couldn't go there. Before that, for 30 years in Berkeley, you could go, and Oakland, you could go and you could complain against a police officer, and the officer would sit there and you would say your piece, and they would say their piece, and then the commission would decide. That's illegal now in California, to do that openly. And the legislature could change that with one vote. And it's sad to say, I heard the legislator here, I don't know him, but I heard him talk about openness and transparency. I'll tell you where there's openness and transparency. In Florida, where they have trials of police officers, administrative trials, on television when they're appropriate news. Not here, because a TV station who would put that on, they would be sued or go to jail. So let's talk about what happened to my client in West Sacramento on November 27, 1990. This gentleman was having a very bad day. It was 4:30 in the morning, and he got out of his car and ran on Business Route 80, which I think is 50 westbound, screaming at motorists, and the West Sacramento police came. So they tried to talk to this guy. He wasn't responding, but he never hit a single police officer the whole time, except when they hit him, of course. So what happened was they came up to him. He, at one point, got on the ledge of the Pioneer Bridge, which is I think, still here. And he then came down. At that point, the police car window, which had trouble because when they used the bullhorn in West Sacramento, it caused the police car window to go down. So that's just what happened there. So the police dog came and attacked this guy, who was no danger to anyone at that point. And the guy threw the dog over the bridge, and the dog was killed. So at that point, the police officers just lost it. They ran this guy over twice. They hit him with the car. He got up. They hit him again. He fell down again. And then one officer ran up and started beating him. And my client jumped over the Pioneer Bridge and was killed. In that case, we filed in 1991. It was 7 say that police officers don't have a tough job, or that they don't, many of them are not really dedicated to the people they serve. I've represented some of them in various hearings, court cases, etc. But I'd like to tell you who the officers were who did all this bad stuff to Mr. Massengill, my client. But I can't, because the California laws won't allow me to tell you what I saw in their personnel files. Now, I testified a number of years ago in front of a legislative committee, and one of the state senators, whatever he was, he said, "Mr. Chanin, how would you like it if your bar record was on the internet?" So I said, well, it really doesn't matter what I think, because my bar record is on the internet. And I am not a public servant. I make private contracts with people. So there's an argument, I guess, if I felt like making it, which I don't, because I have no problem with it, that maybe I shouldn't have my record up there, but these public folks should. But I don't agree with that. I think they should, and they don't. If you put a police officer's personnel file on the internet, you'd be sued so fast it'd make your head spin. And that's wrong. I'm not saying that you should know where police officers live, or you should know their social security number, or you should know their health history. No, that is private. But I am saying when they shoot somebody, when they have a complaint against them, when someone has a legitimate gripe against them, when they get disciplined, that should be public. The public has a right to know what their police officers are doing, and they don't in California. Despite our Democratic governor, despite our supermajority, these Democrats are really no different in this single respect than the Republicans. They're all the same. There are a few who speak out, there are a few who want this to happen, and they're dwarfed by people who are terrified of crime, terrified of these police unions, terrified of not getting elected, which is really, you know, we have term limits now. Do the right thing and change these laws. Thank you.
So once again, thank you to our panelists for participating in this. I'm going to turn it over to public comment in 1 second. I just want to state again for those who came late that we actually wanted a much more balanced discussion on police-community relations. We invited the police chief. In fact, we sent him a certified letter inviting him to come and speak, and we didn't get any response from him. So that's a shame. I've had some good experiences and bad experiences with police officers. There are a lot of very good police officers, and so I don't want the message to go out tonight that all police officers are bad, or that we're necessarily against police officers. But those who violate the law, those who have committed misconduct, we need openness, we need transparency, and we need accountability. So we have a mic right here. Anyone who wishes to tell your story, you can come up and share your story.